Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're sitting at the table again for another one of our Kickstarter previews where we've just played this game. And actually, Jeremy and I have had a couple chances to play this. It's Edge of Darkness. This is a 2 to 4 player game coming up from AEG on Kickstarter probably right now. So we're going to basically share with you our experience and talk a little bit about how the game plays.
This is really unique. So John Clare is the designer of this game, and he came out with Mystic Vale a couple years ago. It's called a card crafting game. And for you guys that don't know what a card crafting game is or haven't followed AEG in the past, this is a game where you have cards that can be seen through, and you're going to be layering these cards on top of each other to get unique abilities. Now, John's been working on this game for like 4 years.
Yeah, this was his baby to begin with, and it kind of Mystic Vale and then Custom Heroes kind of spun off of that, and he's finally getting sort of Edge of Darkness to the forefront.
So the cards that you're using in the game are double-sided. On one side of the card, you have cards that you're going to be crafting and putting into your sleeves to be able to get abilities. But there's times in the games where the card will be flipped over, meaning the bad side are the things that you have to fight as a group. Now these are going to go into 3 distinct locations, and how they're resolved is really cool because you're going to be using a cube tower for things to fall out and then kind of attack specific people depending on what comes out.
Yeah, it's really cool too. The other unique thing about how you build these cards is everyone's sharing the cards, which I've never seen another game do that. Have you guys seen anything like that?
Just Custom Heroes, which kind of feels like he
kind
of spawned that idea off of playtesting this one.
Bits and pieces, but you're going to be building your cards, and then when you use them, they're going to go into a discard pile. Then they're ultimately going to come out, and everyone might be able to draft those in the future and use them. You'll get them back eventually, but everyone gets to utilize your cards sometimes, and you might get a little money out of it.
It makes for an interesting decision you have to make, because you can take your own cards and use them, but if you leave them there, I kind of want to encourage Gary to take them because then he's paying me money to use them.
Yeah, there's dual strategies in what you want to craft and how you want to craft those cards, because obviously you want them to be powerful for you if you're able to draft those, but also you want them to be powerful when other players want to draft them, giving you power to fuel future turns for you.
Yeah, not to mention the fact there are cards in the game from the very get-go that aren't anybody's, and those can be also claimed throughout the game and also built. So there's lots of points to be scored in this game for sure.
Let's talk about all the components first, because what you're seeing here is very much a prototype. Now, we've been sent this. A lot of the printing's not done. You're seeing a lot of components that aren't in their finished version. I believe that the final version is going to have miniatures for all your agents, right? All the cards are going to be see-through, so you're seeing some foggy cards here and some printing that's not 100% done. However, the state of the game is functional. What you have in the center of the board is you have your drafting board. This is the city itself. You're going to have a row of cards that players can draft from. It's also going to hold influence and goodwill, money that you'll be able to gather through the course of the game, and then victory points. On each side, you're going to be able to have locations. Now, each of these boards comes apart. The locations that you use are completely up to you. Now, in the base game, you're going to have around 20 different locations. You're always going to use 10 of those locations. Each of these locations has a number in the corner, which also marries it or pairs it with a very specific stack of cards. So these cards belong to very specific locations. Also, what you're going to notice is that when you set this up, you're going to use very specific locations. You're going to need like one that provides defense, one that provides players to go on a hunt, one that provides players to be able to use money. However, there's going to be different versions. So the way that you construct the city is completely up to the players.
Yeah, there's some basic guidelines like Jeremy said, but then aside from hitting those key locations, it's kind of a mix and match sort of scenario for the rest of them.
Right. For each of these locations, you're going to bring out the stack of cards that belongs to that specific location. If you look at the stack, you're going to see that there's bottom locations, there's middle locations. Some of them even have top locations. It's because each of these cards could possibly be crafted into players' decks to be able to use through the course of the game. Each player is going to start with a player board in front of them as well. This player board is going to house their agents. You have 4 active agents on the top of your board. These are people that you can send out to these locations to be able to place them and then pull them out to be able to do special abilities. And you have untrained agents on the bottom. These are guys that you can train through the course of the game to bring them into the trained agents and be able to do actions. Also, each player has 3 slots in the center that's going to hold your goodwill, your money, your influence to be able to use. And then on the right-hand side, you have a track. This is your defense track. It's kind of like your ability to defend against the threats, and you want to keep that high through the course of the game because that provides you victory points. The more you get beat up through the course of the game, the more you lose victory points.
Yeah, everyone starts out at 16 points on that track, if you can't defend the city when an attack happens, you're going to move down further and further. Now, the first one is a freebie. You don't lose any points, but after that, you start losing more and more.
Each player is also going to start with 3 cards. These are sleeved cards. They're basically the same cards that you see out on the board. These cards, there's 3 citizens and there's 1 patrician. The patrician is a unique card because it provides influence and goodwill for the players. The citizens all provide attack. These are what you're going to be able to use to go hunt these threats that come out. Now, at the very beginning of the game, there's something unique, and it's called the Prologue. This is where players are going to draft some cards into their sleeves to give them base abilities right at the start of the game. So you're going to pick a first player, and then in turn order, you're going to do snake draft. So for the people that don't know what a snake draft is, if I'm the first player, I get to draft one of these cards, add it into my sleeve, and then David, Ryan, Gary, and then Gary will take another turn. We'll snake back around. So everybody will have 2 cards into their sleeve cards, and all of those cards that you draft is really unique because they're going to go into that stack of cards in the center. You don't start with those cards, which is really cool.
You just start with one of these cards. The other cool thing about the Prologue is it kind of kickstarts the game and teaches everyone a little bit about what all the locations do if you don't go through that thoroughly at the beginning. Because when you slot your card, right then in the Prologue, you can actually activate that card as well. So you're actually, and in some of these locations, you're going to be seeding with some of your agents and doing basically some things to set up your first round potentially.
Exactly.
It's tricky because only one person can draft from each location during the Prologue.
Right.
So if you're the first to draft, you get the pick of the board, but by the time it comes back around to you, you're pretty limited. And if you end up with cards out there in the first round that nobody wants, you're not making a ton of money off those.
Yeah, and another thing is too, those locations you pick right from the get-go can kind of give you some direction for your game. There's different engines to set up in this thing and significantly different ways to score your points. So depending on what locations you go heavy in, you usually have to stick with those to some degree unless you can back out at a certain point and shift.
The other cool thing is once you draft those cards, you immediately get to take the action of that in the Prologue. So some of these will give you money right from the start. Some of them will allow you to place agents on these locations, making sure that you're prepared to do hunts or to place defense tokens or to be able to train people in the future. Now, as I said, you're going to draft 2 of those and you have 4 cards. What's going to happen is the 2 that you placed slotted cards into are going to go to the center. You're going to pick one other card to also go to the center, and then the 1 card you have left over will be part of your starting hand. It's going to go into your guild hall. You're going to take all the cards that have been thrown into the center with your starting stack. You're going to mix them all up, and then you're going to draw a line with these cards. These are cards that players will be able to buy through the course of the game, or draft, I should say.
Right. So before we get going on how the actual first round plays, we totally glossed over this tower.
A little bit.
This is absolutely not the final version of this, but it's cool in its own right.
Yeah.
This is a cube tower that will actually spit cubes out in 3 different areas. And like Jeremy said, these are associated with these monsters, so it's going to basically reconcile these threats that come out, and each player has different colored cubes that go in here that represent them. So once a certain number of cubes come out the bottom, that monster is going to attack a particular player, or maybe everybody.
Yeah. So the game couldn't be easier to play. The complexity comes in deciding what you want to do on your turn.
There's a lot of options.
Yeah. So basically there's 2 phases to every single round. You have an assembly phase and then you have an action phase. The assembly phase is basically the drafting portion of the game. Starting with the first player, that player is allowed to draft. Now, any cards that were left in your guild hall, so every player will start with 1. Some rounds you may have no cards in your guild hall. Some you may have a full complement of 3 cards, so you don't draft. You're going to take that and you're going to throw it off to the side with any threat that you've generated. Everyone's going to start with 2 random threat at the start of the game. Then that player is allowed to draft. He's allowed to pick cards from this row. You have to pick from the outside in, and when you draft, you're allowed to skip over cards, but only if you place influence in those locations. So I could take these 2 cards for free, basically, and place them into my side. Or I could skip over these cards, placing influence in the locations that I wish to skip, and take cards after them. Again, you're filling up to 3 spots of cards that you can use during that round. Now, there are ways in the game to get more cards. Those are typically tied into the locations that you control.
Yeah, and like we said, a lot of things are going to be informing your decisions here. You might have some of your cards out there. There may be other players' cards out there that have some really good powers. You can take those, you can use those powers, but when you do, you're going to have to pay that other player a coin for each power on the card that you use.
Yep. Then, once you are done drafting those cards, you're going to look at all the cards in your assembly area. And some of these cards will have threat on them. That's going to be a little number. It's hard to read here, but you're going to count up all the threat that's generated from the cards that you have. And you're going to draw that many from the black bag. When you do that, you're simply going to place those onto your side of the threat zone. These will be added on the next turn for the player. Once that's done, you're actually going to go into the action phase. This is when players are going to take actions from their cards. Now, this is really cool because the actions, you have these action tokens. So players can plan out their actions in advance. On each card, you have a possibility of having 3 different slots. Taking an action on any of these slots requires one of your actions. You can have as many actions, you can do as many things on your turn as you wish, as long as you have the money to fuel them or the agents in order to fuel them. You can plan out your turn in advance. So what I'm basically saying is you're going to look at all the cards that you have in front of you. And if it is my turn, I can say I want to do this, then I want to do this slot and this slot. So that by the time it comes around to the next player, they're saying I'm doing A, B, C, D, all the way to whatever action they want to take.
It's a really cool component that I've personally never seen in another game. And for people who are AP, like myself sometimes, it helps, like Jeremy said, to plan out. And even if you aren't able to plan out, it helps particularly late in the game. Once you have a lot of things you're activating, you can use these, either place them or turn them to show what actions and activities you've done.
At the very start of that phase, though, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to throw your threats into the cube tower. So you're going to take any threat that have been generated from the previous turn
gotta do it.
and throw them in there. And then you look down in this location. If there's ever 8 cubes in one particular location, that's going to trigger the attack from that monster in that row against the player that has the most cubes in there. There's 4 different colors. You're only going to play with the colors of the people participating in the game. However, there's also black. Black will attack everyone at the table.
Which happens a couple times.
Now, this is kind of a different game because you're not really attacking creatures. I mean, there's ways to hunt creatures, but typically you're trying to defend against these from round after round. If you can't defend against them because you haven't gone to the right location, your defense is going to go down, meaning you're going to lose victory points.
Yeah, there are some things on the board that allow you to defend. And again, this is going to vary depending on how you set these up. We have the board set up right now with only one location that's going to provide any defense against the oncoming threats. There are some others in the game, but it can vary from game to game for sure.
The last thing you do on your turn is you get to activate all your slots, as I already said. Now, before you activate slots, in the middle of activating slots, or after you activate all the slots, you're allowed to take any one card and slip it into another card that you have in front of you. You typically want to do that with cards that you own. And you know you own the card because you'll have a guild banner on your cards that you own. That's how you differentiate who owns which different things. You take any one of these, and you immediately take the action of that, which is really cool because you can start building combos in that turn from drafting right and then slotting the right card on that turn.
Yeah, it's really cool too because you might need some resources to power some of the other cards you have in front of you, say money. So you might want to slot the card that gives you 3 coin. Put it in there. Now you have the money to do some of the other things that you needed to do.
Not to mention, also sometimes somebody might defeat a monster that you wanted to defeat, and you're like, oh, well, I just programmed all this. You still are able to take another action, slot it, and then maybe just change up your strategy just a little bit, which is also really unique.
Now,
you're not just stuck in your own programming.
Right.
Yeah.
But you got to keep in mind, at a certain point in the game, all these cards might be gone.
That
So
happens.
then you cannot slot that
Then
card
you're just
anymore.
Fingers
So
crossed it comes back up.
you want it to come back to you. If you haven't invested in that particular card, you're going to have to look for it out here because there's another way to use cards out from the display.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing you need to know more than anything is that you can use any of the abilities or any of the slots on these cards as long as you can pay for them. However, if someone else owns that card, you have to pay them $1 for every slot you want to use on that card. So if you want to use all 3 slots from a card that Gary owns, I owe him $3, 1 for each slot I want to use. There's the crux in the game.
Yeah.
That's how you're trying to craft the best cards. You want to gain those cards because you don't want to have to pay anybody to use them. Plus, each slot that you have filled, that's part of your allegiance, you get victory points at the end.
And the other thing going on with all of those slots that you fill is ultimately some of these cards are going to end up here as monsters.
Yeah.
And for every slot you have filled on the front, you have a slot filled on the back. It just makes these monsters not only stronger, but more interesting to hunt if you're going to go on a hunt because they're going to be worth more victory points. Again, you're going to have a lot of strength to take them down, but that is definitely one significant way to hunt literally victory points in the game.
And there's so many slots. Each card can have 3 slots, but there's so many different actions that you can take. A lot of these actions allow you to place your trained agents into locations. Some of them will have abilities on that location. So if you have like 2 guys on there, your strength may be better or your defense may be better. A lot of them also tie in very specifically with the cards from that location. So having guys on that location, then using that card may give you a benefit as well.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, we won't go over all of these different locations, but just to give you a flavor, there's obviously some that are going to allow you, we've mentioned already, to hunt these creatures. That's a really interesting location, and it takes advantage of all of the attack values on any of the cards you might have. But there are some others, if hunting is not your thing, you can totally go a different route. One of the routes I've taken is you can go to this location here. This guy allows you to put 2 agents in this spot, and then anytime you can take those 2 agents from that spot, spend $5, and then take one of your banner cards, which is a whole separate card, and claim one of the civilian or one of the neutral cards from the beginning of the game. So if a neutral card comes around with 2 slots already filled, because that can happen, I can do that, and I've got 2 points at the end of the game because those cards are worth points.
Plus a card that will get you benefits through the course of the game.
If somebody chooses it and it starts using those slots, now they're paying you.
And one cool thing about owning the card that I don't think we mentioned is when somebody plays it, or if it's a monster and it's killed, it comes directly back to your guild hall.
Yeah.
So if
For the
Gary,
next round.
Yeah, if Gary pulls it because it's got 3 abilities and they're all great, I get to use that card next. I don't have to worry about drafting it or paying for it.
There's ways to use cards, not from their slots, but just to give them up. You had alluded to that already. You can give up 1 card to pull an agent back to your board, because typically when you place these agents, they're locked into those locations unless you use them from the card that's associated with them. If you give up a card and don't use any of the slots on it, just throw that card in the discard pile, you get pulling back. You can also throw away 2 cards that are unused and then use one of the slots from any of the cards that were available in the city, which is really neat.
Still having to pay
If that person
one of
knows
your
it,
opponents if someone else owns it. But like Jeremy said, you can use one of those abilities, and sometimes that really can come in handy.
Once you've used all of your cards, and that could be 3, 4, 5 cards, depending upon which locations are out, any of the cards that were yours that you owned go back to the discard pile. They're going to get cycled back. As Ryan said, any of the cards that you use from other players, they're going to go immediately to that player's guild hall. So not only did they get the benefit of maybe getting a couple bucks from that player using it, but they're going to be able to use that card in the next round.
So yeah, you're going to do these things for 8 rounds, and it moves along at a pretty good clip.
It does.
You get through this game pretty quickly, even with 4 players. And before we get into a little bit more about sort of our thoughts on the game, there's a few things. We'd mentioned influence and goodwill, for instance. These are things you're going to acquire throughout the game. And when you draft these cards, like Jeremy said, you use the influence
To skip over cards.
But when you take cards with the influence on them, you're going to acquire those as goodwill. Those are just sort of quarter points. So as you collect those throughout the game, you might grab a victory point here and there.
So once the game is over, basically you're going to score up all the points. Points are scored like this. Any card that you have allegiance to, meaning you have a banner on that card, it's going to score you 1 victory point for every slot on that card. So if you have a card that has all 3 slots, that's 3 victory points. You're also going to score how many points your city is still in defense mode. So these go from 16 all the way down to 0 if you're not able to defend several turns in a row. Every trained agent that you have a possibility of having 10 trained agents, you're going to score 1 victory point for. Any of the victory points you've acquired through the course of the game, you're going to score victory points for.
And this is the case no matter where they are, because by the end of the game, you'll have agents all over the place, you'll have cards all over the place. You just collect those back up to get your score.
So what are your guys' initial thoughts? We've played this, you and I played this twice now. You guys had the first playthrough.
Right. For someone like myself, I have not played Mystic Vale, and I hadn't played Custom Heroes, so I was wondering how am I going to get into this because I know you all had played it. After the prologue, I really appreciated that because it kind of taught me how the card crafting went. And it took me, without having to play those games prior, which I think maybe some people might think, I was able to jump right into the game by first round and had a really good handle on what I needed to do.
It's super simple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the game is really easy to play. There's literally 2 rounds to every game, and it walks you through on how to approach each of those rounds. All the text you need to know is right there on the cards.
Correct.
The iconography is really, really simple to understand, and then they write out anything else that you would need to know from those locations.
That's where the complexity comes in for sure. Like many good games, super easy to play mechanically, but you might forget what all these things do, but like Jeremy said, it's all right there.
It's the complexity is definitely in the drafting and the timing of your
Right.
actions and how you want to string those actions together.
Yeah, the whole programming and, like you said, the timing aspect of it, that took me maybe a couple rounds to get a hang of it, but once I saw what everyone's doing, I got it. And not to mention, we talked about kind of all the kind of different paths. You know, some people might build up a lot of their cards, a lot of combat.
Yeah.
You went more toward a lot of allegiance. So there's different paths. You may not be able to get that one you want, but, well, I'll keep going for these cards, and I'm going to get close to getting a victory here.
The other thing, too, is you mentioned programming. There's programming in the fact that you can place these on your slots to be able to understand what you want to do, but that program can be changed.
Right.
The moment it
Oh, yeah.
becomes your turn, if the board game state has changed, you have the full ability to change your actions around on that turn.
Well, and that sounds like a thing that's sort of nerve-wracking and you have to get used to, but in most cases it's more of an opportunity might present itself because, like I said earlier, when you're trying to acquire cards and put your banner on them, you want to be looking for particular types of cards that come out in that draft. If a neutral card comes out with 2 slots filled, it's time to try to acquire a card.
Yeah.
Depending on what monsters are up here and what your strength is, what you could possibly get done by fighting or hunting a monster, it all depends on what comes out here. And these get stronger and stronger, so if you've not spent at least some amount of time at the beginning of the game sort of putting into certain locations that might increase your strength, it's going to be more and more difficult to fight these guys.
Yeah.
And get those benefits that they give, which can be really good.
And
Yeah.
when you're planning your turn 2, you might look at all these options and think, man, I just don't have enough money. But then, especially if you're the last player, by the time it comes back to you, you could have $3, $4,
People are
$5,
using your cards,
$5
yeah.
for people using your cards. All of a sudden, options that were blocked are now available to you.
Yeah, it's all about getting a couple little engines going for sure, and then maybe mid-game shifting those engines. Like many good games, you're building an engine, and then at a certain point trying to convert to victory points as much as possible.
Yeah, you'd also mention too that you can play this game in a variety of different ways. Now, we played it twice, and I've approached the game completely different both games that I played. One game I went heavy with
Crafting.
attacking, with crafting cards, basically the entire time, and relied on my ability to play my allegiance cards on a variety of different things, scoring points. This one I went threat heavy early. I went to hunt. And then the last part of the game was me acquiring money and then trading that money in for victory points from one of the cards that I was able to craft.
And I think that's what is most exciting to me about a game like this is playing it multiple times and seeing these locations shift.
Yep.
Because there were certain locations that this game that didn't really seem as strong, but it might couple really well with one of the locations that you're not using that game, and next time you play, all of a sudden, that's the hot card to draft.
I can't wait to see all the locations they have. Like we said, we only have 10 here. There's 20 at least, maybe more on the way, and the variability here will be ridiculous.
The other cool thing too is if you don't notice, this board is modular. It comes off. These are called extension boards, so you can place the cards on these. And if you have a smaller table space, you get rid of these extension boards and you place the cards directly upon the locations themselves.
Very
Yeah,
smart.
they've definitely given a lot of thought to the components. We had our first play, we actually had a chance to play with the guys, the designer and John Zinzer from AEG, and some of the ideas that they even shared with us that we probably can't even go into right now about little things they want to do to try to really amp up every little aspect of this. It's really exciting.
Very cool game, guys. This one is Edge of Darkness. It's from AEG. It's going to be on Kickstarter. If you guys have any questions about them, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
This episode has been brought to you in part by Raskellers, handcrafted tables for board gaming. Check them out at www.raskellers.com.